Hi everyone. For our last uh, class presentation, what I'll be doing today is briefly touching on our final project. So I'll kind of walk through the guidelines with you and then turn our attention to just some advice on how to approach the project. And then I have a few examples of past visuals to just give you an idea of what they look like. These are the same three visuals I brought to our class the last time we met, but I imagine that it probably kind of slipped your mind exactly what they look like. So I thought I could bring them back to your attention today. So before we get to the visuals themselves, what we're looking at is a final project that basically has two different parts. One part is the visual itself. The second part is a two-page description of your visual project. And together, the project is worth 70 points, 35 points being allocated for both parts, the visual representation and the two-page description of your project. And so the project is due on the 8th of May, and you'll be turning it in at the same location that you turned in your other assignments during our time online. So getting into the visual itself, the visual representation can be thought about as being twofold. First of all, what you're going to be doing is picking a specific theme that came up in our class. It can be something that we talked about a lot, such as gender inequality or gender socialization, or it could be something that perhaps we didn't talk about at length, but something that we did touch on in the class, whether it be something that we went through in the book or something that we talked about in the articles. So you want to focus on a specific theme and in the directions. In addition to socialization and inequality, we have the doing gender, gender norms, gender identities, and degendering. So those are just examples of themes that we've talked about during the semester. But again, feel free to come up with your own examples of a topic. The topic could be something like, the media, education, family. So you'd focus on an institution as your main topic and then break it down as such. Or again, anything kind of relates to gender, how it's something that we do, how it connects to inequality, or again, kind of that gender, social, psychological level where we talk about socialization, gender identities, performing gender. So again, you have a lot of different options in terms of the theme that you pick. And what you'll do with your selected theme is break it down with respect to our course framework. So you have your theme, and then you break it down in terms of the cultural dimension, the social psychological dimension, and the social institutional dimension. And so you take our course framework and apply it to your theme under study. And so basically, that's what the visual is going to capture in one form or another. All three parts, the culture, the social psych, and the institution, and how the three parts individually relate to your theme, and how there's also an interconnection among the three that come together to connect to your theme. So for the second part of the project, the two-page description, basically you're going to be describing what your visual is and how that visual captures the theme and how it captures our course framework, the three different dimensions. And so originally the project did have you presenting it to the class, but since we're not in class together anymore face to face, I removed that part of the project. And so you can think about the two-page description as basically, what you'd be talking about when you would have been presenting your project to the class. So the two-page description gives you a chance to describe for the reader, describe for your audience basically what your visual is, and again, how it captures our course dimension and how it captures your selected theme. So that's how to think about the project and how you make the visual. You can draw it by hand. You can take pictures from newspapers, magazines, or just kind of where else you would find images on the internet and make kind of a collage formation into your visual. Or it can be a mixture, different images you get online from the different sources, or different images that you get simply from drawing them and put those together. So in terms of how I grade the visual itself, basically what I'm looking for is thought and effort. I don't want to see something that's been kind of just thrown together randomly, that comes across as been kind of thrown together without too much thought and effort put into it. So I don't expect everybody to be an artist extraordinaire, but I do expect you to put in kind of the thought and the effort into your visual. And that's how basically, you'll get those 35 points. And again, as long as I kind of see that, and you'll be getting, those points for the visual aspect. For the two-page description, basically, again, you get the points for simply describing what the visual is. So when I look at it, or when the audience will look at it from the get-go, we may not exactly know what you're doing or how you're doing it. But once you are describing it to the reader in your paper, once you're describing it to your audience, we should be able to kind of see what you're doing and how you're doing it. So think about that in terms of the two-page description, basically showing the reader, this is my visual, and this is what it represents, and this is how I constructed it. Turning our attention to our course framework, we can kind of break down the three different dimensions with respect to what you're going to be doing with your theme. So this, for examples, I can use gender inequality or doing gender as themes and break those down with our course framework. And so here what I tried to do is kind of remind ourselves exactly the three dimensions and kind of how they connect to each other, recognizing kind of the interplay of the three in addition to kind of what they do individually. So starting where we started in the semester, we can look at how gender culture shapes our thoughts and actions by providing us the kind of norms and the social expectations of gender behavior. And when we look at how that culture, the norms and expectations shape our thoughts and actions, what we're doing is linking culture to social psychology. And then once we internalize culture and make it part of how we see ourselves, make it part of how we see other people, whether it be endorsing the gender culture or trying to resist it, once we make that gender culture part of our thinking ways, that shows how our gendered social psychology is a reflection, directly, indirectly, of the larger gendered culture. And when looking at how our gendered social psychology, again, how we endorse, how we follow, or how we resist, or how we reject gendered culture, and that shows kind of the linking of our social psychology to the larger culture as a whole. And then we can move into the last part of our semester where we looked at the institutional foundations of gender. And we talked about institutions are important because on the one hand, they produce gender culture, meaning that our families, our schools, our media, religion, all these different institutions contribute to producing that gendered culture. And so here we see the linking of institutions to culture, but also we can see how institutions relate to social psychology by recognizing that institutions provide us the social spaces in which we learn and we internalize the gender culture. So here we're looking at interactions with, our family within the living room, interactions with our peers at the lunch table at school, interactions with the media, whether it be at home or in our cars or at a movie theater. So the interactions with the institutions, inside the institutions, link the institutions to our social psychology, making it how we internalize that culture to make it part of our social psychological makeup. So there we see how all three pieces come together. Institutions linked to social psychology by providing us the spaces in which we interact with the culture. Institutions relate to culture by producing the cultural ways. Our social psychology reflects our culture when we learn, and when we take the lessons learned to kind of navigate our daily lives, and then the culture as a whole, when internalized, shapes our social psychology. So there's kind of the interplay of the three different dimensions of our course framework. And then I add at the bottom there, we can also recognize a third element of institutions, how they often organize the sexes into different spaces. And this sex separation makes it easier to perform gendered socialization. It makes it easier to perform gender as a whole, compared to if you're trying to socialize the sexes differently, where the sexes are in the same space, or when people are trying to perform masculinity or perhaps perform femininity when they're in mixed sex situations. Just a quick run through of three different examples of visuals. So here, what we're looking at is the theme of gendered education and how the student went about kind of discussing the theme relates specifically to higher education. And we look at how education is gendered with respect to who goes to college, men and women, and how that's evolved over time. Kind of different gaps in terms of who has college degrees, advanced college degrees, issues of Title IX. So we can see on the visual the different ways they kind of attack it, also gender majors as well. So kind of different her and his versions of education. And when looking at it again, the kind of breakdown of the theme with respect to the three different course framework dimensions. So here, the institutional dimension part is easy because you're using the institution of education. So right off the bat, you have your institution, and then you talk about how your institution is producing a certain culture and how the institution is producing a certain social psychology within it. So again, you can see how the visual is kind of made up of a collage-like creation of different images, whether it be pictures or different graphs. And again, in your presentation to the class, you would have talked about kind of the interplay of the three and what all the images kind of represent, but you'll be doing that for us in your paper, kind of saying, okay, here's my visual, and here's kind of the narrative when it comes to the three parts of our course framework. The second example captures our three course dimensions by looking at the institution of media and how that media produces a certain gender culture and how that gender culture becomes then part of one social psychology by looking at the gender body. So the theme is the body, and to kind of break down the gender body, the student decided to look at specifically um, how the media produces a certain culture around the body and how that's gendered and how that culture becomes part of our social psychology. So, again, what you see is a collection of different images, whether it be images of characters, images of models, politicians, images of magazine covers, and again, kind of in a collage like form, kind of puts everything together and uses that to create a narrative to break down the gendered body with respect to the institution of media and how that media creates a certain gender culture around the body. And again, how when we are exposed and re-exposed to that culture, how that shapes our social psychologies. So again, it's a different theme to look at, a different institution to break down the theme. But again, the narrative is kind of captured within all the different images that come together that you'll talk about in your two-page description. The final example we can look at is similar in terms of a gender body theme, but specifically, the student was looking at the theme of the sexual objectification of men and women. So the student talked about how disproportionately women are objectified sexually more than men, but you can still see the objectification of men. If you look close enough, you'll find it as well. So, like the previous project, the institution being looked at is the media. So, looking at kind of magazine covers, different commercials, different headlines when it comes to the media. And then again, how that institution produces a certain culture of objectification, whether it be, again, objectifying men in the male body, objectifying women in the female body, and then kind of looking at how that culture can contribute to one's social psychology. So, again, when men see these images of kind of the ideal objectified body, um, they want to look a certain way, whether it be for other men or for women. When women are exposed to these images, again, perhaps they want to look a certain way to be attractive to other people. And so, again, it's kind of different ways of looking at it. And there's some, quotes in there that were kind of used to talk about the social psychological dimension of this. But nevertheless, again, images all there to tell a story, and that narrative of the objectification of the body is broken down with respect to the institution, to the culture, and the social psychology. So I hope this helped a little bit. Just a little insight into the project, how you can approach it, and some examples that can maybe get you thinking about exactly what you want to do and how you want to do it. So I'll leave that there. And as always, if you have any questions, please let me know.